You are listening to a Beach Glass Media podcast.
Terrible news coming to us from the White House this past week. A plane filled with murderous Venezuelan gang members who were captured by ICE were sent flying out of the U.S. and over to El Salvador to be imprisoned at one of their state-of-the-art prisons that the Salvadoran president Nayib Bukele has created in order to make El Salvador safer and a much nicer place to live for its citizens. However, when U.S. Judge James Boasberg heard about Trump's plan to deport criminal violent thugs out of the U.S., the judge said, quote, "Well, wait here just a darn tootin' second. I know this fascist dictator, which the Republicans have elected in a democratic fashion, is only doing what he promised he would do, but is this one of his new peace through strength executive orders that he and his administration are pushing? Well, that's not right. Peace through strength sounds like a form of toxic masculinity to me, and I'd prefer the phrase diversity is our strength. Yes, that's right. Diversity should be our strength because everyone is unique and special and should be affirmed in this beautiful country. Therefore, as an appointed judge, I am going to block Trump's plan to fly violent gang members to El Salvador and bring them back over here to the United States where they belong because diversity is our strength. And morally, it is not feasible to have a diverse country without violent gang members in it. We all know violent gang members are a marginalized minority. So, without violent gang members, who then would be left to terrorize our citizens? Not on my watch. I, Judge James Boasberg, am making a presidential executive order to stop the plane rides, even though I know, I'm not the president. And yes, President Trump is, in fact, part of the executive branch of government, but I must do this for the sake of diversity. And that is that. End quote. In other news, last week we saw several attacks and vandalism against the electric vehicle company Tesla, including Tesla dealerships, Tesla charging stations, and Tesla electric vehicles. They were vandalized with some cars and dealerships spray painted, and in some extreme cases, cars set on fire. Also, videos circulated across social media where random passers-by began berating random Tesla owners simply for owning a Tesla. One protester was overheard saying, quote, "We hate Elon Musk and his close ties to the president. Instead of saving taxpayer money by cutting funds to useless government programs, we should be saving the planet. We need more EV vehicles out on the streets in order to fight climate change. Instead of building rockets to Mars, we should be building more electric vehicles, and we should be investing in electric vehicle state mandates. If only our government would partner with EV car companies, then this world would be a better place. Now, excuse me, I see a Tesla over there that could use a spray-painted swastika on it." End quote. And lastly, Disney's live-action remake of Snow White is finally out in theaters, and, well, it's a wonder why not a lot of moviegoers are anticipating the release of such a beloved classic. Yes, no one really cared about the Pinocchio remake or the Dumbo remake or the Lion King remake or the Aladdin remake, except me, or the Lady and the Tramp remake or even the Little Mermaid remake, which, for some reason, oddly enough, Ariel looked a little different than what I remembered her looking like when I was young. Anyhow, so Disney had a remarkable idea. Since remakes are not popular and since they already ruined the Star Wars franchise for good, they wondered, why not redo the film that actually put us on the map back in 1937? How about we remake Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? Yes, Disney must have thought. We owe Snow White a big thank you because without Snow White, we probably wouldn't even exist. So let's not mess this one up like how we messed up the other ones. What can we do? Let's see. Yes. I know. Let's make Snow White, whose name is actually a reference to the description of her skin color. Let's make Snow White brown. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out when the evil witch asked the magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" The magic mirror responded, quote, "Well, it's not Rachel Zegler, that's for sure. Inside and out. No pun intended. I mean, have you seen how she trash talks the original Snow White in interviews? My golly, it's like she's some kind of entitled elitist. Jeez Louise. Rachel Zegler should have been offered the role of Dopey." End quote. My name is Andrew Reyes, and this is Faith in Politics with me, Andrew Reyes. Welcome back to the podcast. I know it's been a while, and there has been so much in recent news that I wish I could talk all about it, but I just don't have the time. So instead, today's episode is going to be a little bit different than the previous episodes. You know, I usually have a faith topic and then a political topic. However, today I made an executive order to axe the political portion on today's episode because the faith topic turned out to be rather long. So today on the podcast, as you've already read the title of this one, I'll be talking about marriage. Just some thoughts that have been floating in my head about marriage. But before I dive into the topic of marriage, I just want to quickly remind you that if you are listening to this podcast, please take a second to rate, review the podcast wherever you are listening. Excuse me. A 5-star review would be nice. And share the podcast with a friend if you feel compelled to. And also follow the podcast on Instagram. I have an Instagram page, which is the easiest way to stay up to date when new episodes are up and available. But not only that, I've been making some satirical headlines on the Instagram page, which, hey, you might find it amusing. So please follow on Instagram, drop me a line, or email me at faithandpoliticsandrew@gmail.com, or you can tell me all the things you love or hate about this podcast. Please, though, I'm serious. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So with that out of the way, let's continue to today's episode. Marriage. Let's jump right in. The Netflix reality show series Love is Blind has been in recent news. And I'm not going to lie, this is one of the few shows that the missus and I tend to watch together. And I don't know why I find the show compelling, but perhaps it's because of the idea of love, finding true love or finding that soulmate in life. That idea has been romanticized in our culture. And I think that we as humans, with various desires and impulses, we tend to yearn for that optimal fairy tale version of love to play itself out in our lives. But not just for ourselves, but for others as well. I think there is a basic perception in modern society that finding that perfect person will be the thing that makes life better and worth living in order to obtain that happily ever after storybook ending that, we grew up hearing about. I think we desire that fantasy to become a reality. For those of you who don't know the premise of Love is Blind, it is basically a dating show where the objective is for two people to find true love and try to connect with someone without seeing the other person. It kind of has remnants of the classic show The Dating Game, but in Love is Blind, a pool of men and a pool of women, they get to intermingle and go on dates and what they call pods, and they try to connect and fall in love simply by having multiple interactions or dates. And all of this without seeing one another. There's like a wall between them, excuse me, where the point is to figure out if love truly is blind. Can you fall in love with a person without having seen them physically? It's an interesting concept, and I must admit, this experiment was intriguing for the first couple of seasons, but now Love is Blind is on season 8, and I found myself, honestly, a little bored watching this latest season. So maybe the concept is just losing its luster. But anyway, on Love is Blind, the true test of the experiment is to see if the couples, once they get engaged, see if their love is strong enough to make it official and get married. This, of course, is the climax of the show because the viewer is always on the edge of their seat, waiting anxiously to see if the couples will tie the knot, live happily ever after, and show the world that, hey, this experiment works because love truly was blind for us. Now, at the time of recording this episode, I have not finished the latest season of Love is Blind. I think I have one episode left. However, there's this particular couple that went viral on social media because in the end, they did not tie the knot. And spoilers, the reason why the woman could not say yes to marrying the man was because basically he was a Christian and had a Christian faith. I have an audio clip of the scene. Let's check it out.
Sarah, and apologies for losing my voice at the bachelor party. I never could imagined in a million years that this process would have brought me to someone as incredible as you. Loving, caring. You exceeded what I thought I was looking for. You make me a better person each and every day and every time I'm with you. As you could tell, I was like a little boy, just being super excited to see that not only were you beautiful on the inside, but also on the outside. And then also just our physical connection with how we tease each other, play around, are connected to each other both physically and emotionally is on just another level than I could have ever dreamed. It can't be put into words, but I love you so much. And I just love hearing how other people just can see it between us because it makes me know that they see what I see and that it's real. The whole process has brought me to you and brought me to love you more than anyone or anything I could ever have imagined.
You have made the impossible seem possible. You are quite literally everything I've ever hoped and wanted in a lifelong partner. I first fell in love with your voice, and then seeing you, you're an immediate best friend. I fell in love with your smile, your soft, empathetic, selfless heart, your goofy, funny personality. You've just given me so much life. And there's no doubt in my mind that we were meant to choose each other. And I love you so much.
Sarah and Ben, you chose to spend the rest of your lives together based on a deep emotional connection. Looks, age, finances, and all the superficial things of the world were not a factor for you two. Now is the time to decide if love is blind. Will you get married and commit to face life together as husband and wife? Or will you walk away forever? Sarah, will you embrace Ben to be your husband as your companion and best friend for life? Will you treat him with love and devotion, honor and respect? Will you stand by him in the triumphs and tragedies of life as a faithful and caring wife? If yes, say, I will.
Ben, I love you so much. But I've always wanted a partner to be on the same wavelength. And so today I can't. I'm sorry, but I don't want that to be misunderstood. I still love you, and everything about you is amazing. And I care about you so much.
I care about you too. And I love you so much. And I know I want to stay with you and keep growing our relationship if you'll let me.
We'll see. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay. I love you.
I love you so much.
I know that the connection we have is so real. And my heart is there. But we talked about a lot of the values that I hold so close to my heart. Making this decision, my mind is telling me I can't.
Rise and fall right now.
Oh my gosh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Get me out of here. No. You guys, really, I'm okay. I'll go.
Well, it's okay if you're not.
No, I'm just sad. All day I was thinking about going up to the altar, seeing Ben there. I knew seeing him was gonna bring me, just make my heart melt. And it did.
Love you, buddy. Love you too.
I love him so much. He is everything, pretty much, that I've wanted. Still today, I could see myself saying yes. I don't know. I feel kind of numb.
Yeah. Do you?
Oh yeah. Because it's
sure.
sad. I was really
really
excited
sad.
about Ben, and I'm he's such a great person. I just
What?
I just hope I made the right decision.
Was it the time frame?
I mean, I knew the whole time coming into this, the time frame, that's not, I feel like I know him. Really.
Yeah.
I remember, I asked him about, Black Lives Matter, and I'm no expert. But, when I asked him about it, he was like, I guess I've never really thought too much about it. That affected me, especially in our own city. How could it not? How did it not make you think about something? I asked him, too, what his church's views are, and he said he didn't know. And so then I watched a sermon online.
From his church?
About, sexual identity.
Okay.
And it was traditional. I told that to Ben. And
his thoughts on it?
He doesn't really have much to say about it, I want him to think about that stuff. Sometimes I did wonder if it was surface, fun, carefree love that we had. Equality, religion, the vaccine, right? I brought up all these things because I think they're all important conversations. Whatever you believe, at least like have the conversation. There was no like curiosity coming from his side. I've always just thought that I'd want to be with someone who was more curious about my brain and like how I think about things. People prove who they are, you know? Like actions speak louder than words. You can say anything you want, but show me. That would have changed everything if he really showed priority.
Oh, wow. That was painful listening to it. As you heard, according to Sarah, Ben did not fully embrace the Black Lives Matter activist ideology. And there was also something about Sarah's sister being a lesbian. So according to her, Ben's Christian worldview is somehow hurtful towards the LGBTQ, VWX, Y, and Z, plus minus IAA2 spirited people community. Anyway, because this clip went viral, it spoiled the couple's experiment outcome for me, because I had already seen how it was going to play itself out. But as I watched this season, when I finally had the chance, I watched Ben and Sarah's interactions and their conversations with a different pair of eyes. And I noticed from their interactions that, yeah, I could tell it wasn't going to work out. So everybody on social media started speculating on Ben and Sarah's relationship. And, you know, there was a lot of fuss about Ben's Christian worldview. He went to church on Sundays, and he emphasized to Sarah when they were in the pods that his faith was a big part of his life. But Sarah's response was something along the lines of, oh, my sister's a lesbian, and I know the church has been hurtful to the LGBTQ, VWX, Y, and Z, plus minus community. And it made me think, is this true? Has the church been hurtful to this community? Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this issue of the LGBTQ, VWX, Y, and Z stuff on this episode, because that will probably be its own episode on this podcast in the future. But when I think Sarah, what I think Sarah on Love is Blind is referring to is this idea that the LGBT people traditionally are not affirmed of their sexual identity in the church setting. Usually the more traditional conservative type of churches. So without spending too much time on that, because I want to focus on marriage, is that the church and Christianity in general for thousands of years has understood quite accurately that biblically homosexuality is a sin. More specifically, engaging in the act of homosexuality, that is the sin. However, not exactly, having same-sex attraction, but the act itself. The Bible is pretty clear when describing sin that the temptation to sin is not a sin, but acting out on the temptation is. I've also heard it phrased another way regarding homosexuality, that orientation is not a sin, but activity is. Okay, you're wondering, Andrew, what the hell is your point here? Some people are going to say that I'm being offensive, and some people are just thinking, yeah, these are facts. Yeah, I knew all this stuff that you're saying. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if we read Jesus carefully in the Bible, obviously, he calls people to repentance, to repent from their wicked ways and turn to him. What am I saying? When you meet Jesus, your behaviors should change because you understand who Jesus is and what he has done for you. A quick example. In the Bible, Jesus hung out with the prostitutes, not to tell them that what they were doing is fine and dandy, but instead to stand up for them because they were seen as less than in society. And we see this with Jesus' interaction with the woman caught in the act of adultery. Jesus basically saves her life from people getting ready to stone her to death. And then tells the woman, look, I don't accuse you. Get up and go and sin no more. The concept is, yes, we are all sinners. We all miss the mark. And did that adulterous woman go out and sin again? Probably. But that's just because we are imperfect. But the idea is to repent from sinful behaviors, meaning turn around, make a U-turn from your sinful lifestyle and choices, and instead move toward a lifestyle pleasing to God. Man, I did not want to go through all of that, but what was I trying to get to? Oh, yeah, marriage. So, why do we even marry? What is the point of marriage? Why are television viewers interested in Love is Blind? Well, I think it's because we all understand the idea of falling in love and the idea of soulmates and wanting to build a beautiful relationship. Perhaps some of us have seen this modeled before us, and maybe some of us haven't. Maybe we see this idea of true love in the movies, and it makes us feel all warm and fuzzy on the inside, and we tell ourselves, I want that. I remember when I was young, and by young, I mean a kid practically. For some reason, I knew from such a young age that I wanted to marry someone and to have kids. This is going to sound crazy, but I think it probably started around 5th grade when I had my first crush on a girl in class. This is kind of embarrassing to say, but I remember making her a special Valentine card on Valentine's Day, hoping she would notice. But sadly, she didn't. Anyway, then after 5th grade, I think it wasn't until 8th grade, I developed another crush on a girl. And I remember it was always a certain type of personality that drew me in. It was a bubbly and fun, loud, and a little bit silly type of personalities that all my crushes had. And then it took me a long time to realize, probably by the time I met my wife, that all along, the type of personalities that I was attracted to was basically the same as my mom's. Rest in peace. But the female model that was given to me was my mom. So it makes sense why I was attracted to that type of girl. My mom was funny, silly, caring, and loving to my siblings. Looking back, that played a huge role in who I married. It's obvious now, but I think it's subconscious when you're young. I had a girlfriend in high school who I thought I was going to marry. Of course, this being my teenage brain, which I can honestly say I'm glad it didn't work out, because it took me being in a relationship to realize, yeah, we were just two very different people. You know, no ill will towards her, but looking back, I think it was good for both of us for us to have split. Sometimes experience teaches you your likes and dislikes. And of course, that teenage split was heartbreaking, but heartache and breakups, well, that's just part of life. I think because, you really want something to be true, and you want it to be true love, quote unquote, that you ignore the red flags. And that is usually why things end so poorly in relationships sometimes. We just ignore the red flags. So, excuse me. I was sick all week, so that's why I have a little cough. I apologize. So why get married? I watched an interview between Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire and a popular YouTube influencer, Pearl Davis, who she makes the case why men shouldn't get married. It was a fascinating exchange. Pearl, who is a lovely woman, a Catholic, says men shouldn't get married for the following reasons. The cards are stacked against men if a marriage ends in divorce, because the woman can take almost everything from a man through divorce. She says also that the type of women who are marriage material for a man are scarce in society. basically, her argument is that the women of today are not the same type of woman from say 70 years ago, and that men will be miserable to marry the modern type of woman, that the quality of woman has gone down, so there are not enough good women to go around for men, so men should just completely opt out of marriage until the system is fixed, such as, fixing the issue of no-fault divorce and that kind of stuff that happens in divorce court. Her claim is divorce is biased, favoring women, basically. Here's a clip of what the interview between Pearl and Michael Knowles, just so you can get an idea. Here we go.
I just think a lot of times I hear you guys' advice to go to church and find a good woman. And I don't necessarily think it's bad advice in general. But again, I think that times have changed. And I think a lot of times you guys are a bit out of touch with what the average man is going through in this country.
Well, what do you mean by the average man, I guess? Men come in all shapes and sizes. So, acknowledging the fears of the modern...
Do you think men have valid fears in getting married? Do you think any of it's valid, or do you think they're making it up?
Yeah, I think marriage entails risk.
Okay.
But there are ways to mitigate risk.
There are
it's
ways,
a natural institution.
Correct. There are ways to mitigate risk.
Yeah.
But because I don't know, when you talk about this stuff, you guys are just sorry, I don't mean to say you guys, but
please generalize. Sorry. It's okay.
But sometimes I'm just like, how do you not see where the men are coming from? I've talked to men that did the exact same thing. That they took you guys' advice to a T.
What's our advice? Our advice is just
to marry. I've seen
married.
a lot of stuff from the Daily Wire.
Yeah.
Okay, might be you, might be other guys that say get married young, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, but I'll see guys that take you guys' advice, and sometimes it ruins their life
because they get divorced.
And the divorce isn't like the woman ruins their reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Calls him an abuser. And even calls him an abuser, says all these awful things. He hasn't seen his kids in 2 years.
It's awful. Yeah.
And it's the saddest thing when you see a man that's going through a divorce.
So what's the alternative, though? Because I totally agree with you about the risk and the pitfalls of modern marriage.
Well, I think that the laws need to change first, because regardless of what I say...
Before people get married?
Well, it's not about what I say. It's about what people will do. You guys have been preaching marriage for a decade. Men aren't signing up.
No,
men aren't. The rate of but the rate of getting married is going lower.
Right, but
less and less men are getting married.
We redefined marriage at federal levels.
Correct.
We've also had divorce for 50 years.
Correct. No, you're right. You're correct. But I'm saying laws need to change. Personally, if it was Pearl's world,
yes.
And I think you're probably going to have to find somewhere that meets in the middle for something to pass. But if it was Pearl's world, I wouldn't have alimony. I wouldn't have child support. I don't think you're entitled to it.
Yeah, I would certainly eliminate no-fault divorce, and I would greatly restrict divorce broadly.
Yeah, but I think until you do that, you're going to have a hard time getting men to sign up, until women get in shape.
Sure.
If 70% of women are overweight, that's not a great sell to men.
But okay, so
80% of women gain 20 pounds in the first 5 years of marriage.
Laugh out loud on that last point. So I'll admit it's a compelling argument. Pearl claims she's interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of men who thought they were marrying the perfect Christian girl they've fallen in love with, but then after a year or two, they want a divorce for whatever reason. Say the woman is simply not happy, the guy has done nothing wrong, quote unquote. Then they quickly get divorced, and then the woman takes more than half of the man's money, leaving the man basically to start over from zero. That kind of stuff. That's kind of where Pearl is coming from. And yes, I do believe that does happen, and it is a tragedy and sounds like a nightmare. And yes, we should be aware that these things do happen in real life. However, I am not convinced that people should opt out of marriage completely because of stuff like that. I mean, I'm not convinced that people can be truly happy, or at least the majority of people can be truly happy and feel fully fulfilled in life by being single. I believe we are social creatures and we depend on one another, and we naturally have the capability to bring new life into the world via sex, which is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful things in life that I have been privileged to experience. So all that to say, yes, marriage is important, worth it, and at least necessary, not only for a couple, but for healthy families. I mean, studies suggest that children raised in a stable two-parent household tend to be better academically, emotionally, and are more resilient when faced with adversity than compared to other types of family structures. On average, of course. And I am a firm believer that it is better for a child to know who their mom and dad are, and for the mom and dad to be present and active in their lives. Now, don't go crucifying me here, but I understand that not everyone is born into a nice two-parent, married parents' household, or have caring, present parents. And I am truly sorry if you were raised in a household that was less than ideal. I understand there are several hardships in life. I wish life was perfect for everyone, but unfortunately we live in a fallen world. But there is so much literature and data and statistics that prove that the mom, dad, child picture of a family is not only the most healthy, but also the most obvious picture of what a marriage should be. Marriage as a social institution has, it is believed to have been around for about 4,300 years or so. And at its core, it is understood to be for two people, a man and a woman, to make a commitment to be together and for the purpose of raising children together. Once again, I'm not completely heartless. I understand not all couples can procreate, but in a majority of married couples, yes, a child can only be conceived through a man and a woman. This should not be controversial, but, however, since the LGBT, UV, WX, Y, and Z activists want to appropriate marriage and change the definition of marriage. Now, to say things like only women can get pregnant, you can be subject to getting banned or canceled on social media. But anyway, common sense, which is not too common anymore. Common sense can explain that, yes, sex can lead to a pregnancy. Actually, common sense says sex and pregnancy are very much closely related. Surprise, surprise. So if a woman does get pregnant, the best outcome would be to have the father of the child around. So therefore, even better than that, it would be better to find a good solid mate before having children with a common core set of beliefs to make for a solid future. If only we had someone in our lives to give us this wisdom for a successful life and family building future. Wait, there is wisdom about marriage? Where? Oh yeah, the Bible. What does the Bible say about marriage? Well, we are given the example of marriage in the first book with the creation story, with the creation story of Adam and Eve. The first couple in the Bible. God made them male and female, the scripture says, and that a man should leave and cleave to his wife and raise children together. Jesus in the New Testament is seen quoting that part in Genesis when he is asked about divorce. And he has some strong words about divorce, believe it or not, which, you can read for yourself in Matthew chapter 19. And in the book of Ephesians, we see a biblical understanding of marriage, that there are certain roles given to the husband, certain roles given to the wife. The husband should take the leadership role, but Not in a dictatorial or condescending way, no. In fact, the example given is that husbands should take the example of Jesus leading the church with compassion, mercy, forgiveness, respect, and selflessness. Wives are to submit to their husbands. Feminists, you're not going to like that one. Even though, let's be real, look, the modern feminists, they hate women. I mean, they can't define what a woman is anymore. And they stay silent when men compete in women's sports, stripping actual women from awards and scholarships. But you know what? I'll save my full thoughts about that for another episode, so I digress. The point I was making is that husbands and wives are supposed to submit to one another out of reverence for Jesus Christ. As stated in the book of Ephesians, respect is the key element here. There must be mutual respect for each other for marriage to work in symphony. It has to be a symphony, like a musical piece. Mutual love, respect, and submission. Those are all, it's the cornerstone of a Christian marriage. I've brought up Tim Keller on this podcast before, and I want to share a clip from a conference that he spoke at about marriage. Tim Keller was a pastor, rest in peace, a New York Times best-selling author known for his book, The Reason for God, which I recommend, but also the author of The Meaning of Marriage, which I listened to on audiobook, and it was really good. It's a good overview on the Christian view of marriage. In this clip, Tim Keller makes some great points about marriage relating to the current culture, which, keep in mind, this conference that he spoke at, it was given in 2012, but it still holds true today. So let me play this clip that I like.
So first of all, when I say the unreal and distorted relationship of our culture to marriage, I can be brief, but I also want to be real specific. Here are 3 statistics, facts, that the divorce rate today is about 50%. About 50% of marriages end in divorce. In 1960, and that didn't seem like a very long time to me, but anyway, in 1960, it was the divorce rate was half that. Here's a second one, which I think is extremely important. In 1960, 75% of all U.S. adults were married. Today, it's less than 50%, which is a huge change. And then thirdly, as many of you know, in 1960, the percentage of people who cohabited, men and women living together apart from marriage, without being married, that percentage was negligible. It wasn't really on the map. Today, 1/4 of all unmarried women ages 25 to 40 are living with a partner, living with a man. And over half of all women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s will at one time cohabit. And those statistics are striking. The change is really big in the culture. The statistics also show a set of assumptions that are pretty pervasive out there. A set of assumptions. And here's what some of the assumptions are. One is that one of them is that most marriages are unhappy. And you can sort of see why people would think that. They say, well, now wait a minute, if 50% of all marriages end in divorce anyway, surely a certain percentage of the others that survive aren't happy, and therefore most marriages are unhappy. A second assumption is that living together before you get married is a great way to figure out whether it's the right person, especially if you've got the right sexual and romantic chemistry, which is understood as the key to other things. That if you have the right sexual and romantic chemistry, that's what you have to find, and living together helps you understand whether that's there, and especially if it's there in a kind of enduring way. Another assumption is that the key to satisfying marriage is finding that perfectly compatible soulmate. And that is defined, and you can see it actually, Kathy and I noticed, for example, on eHarmony, there was an ad this way. The perfectly compatible soulmate that people out there are looking for is someone who won't change me. Somebody who accepts me just as I am. Somebody who will affirm me, not change me, release me to be myself, and not shackle me. Now, these assumptions show a real fear of marriage, a real negative attitude toward marriage, a real insecurity about marriage. And yet, here's another set of facts. These are also empirical facts, and listen to this. First, those who live together before marriage are more likely to get divorces than those who do not. In other words, if you cohabit before you get married, you're more likely to divorce. Secondly, in general, the earlier that sex is introduced to a relationship, the more likely that relationship is to break up. Thirdly, yes, it's true that the divorce rate is 50%, but the greatest percentage of divorces happen to people under the age of 18. There's quite a lot of that. And people who haven't completed high school. And therefore, if you complete your high school and college and you get married in your early or mid-20s, your chances of getting divorced are much, much, much less than 50%. And, listen to this, 2/3 of all marriages that say they're unhappy, if they stay together 5 years later, they say they're happy. 2/3. And also, over the last 40 years, in general, 62% of all people who are married said they were very, not happy, but very happy with their marriage, and those numbers have stayed up. And of course, you probably heard these, and that is there are piles and piles of data that say that married people have a far higher level of physical health, mental health, wealth accrual at every age, and children who grow up with two married parents all their lives have a 200 to 300% more likely chance of positive life outcomes. You've heard that. In other words, here's my first point's over. I'm done with my first point. What's the first point? The first point is that even though our culture has tremendous fears about marriage, tremendous lack of belief in marriage, constant calls for saying marriage has had it, the reality is that marriage is still the best thing possible for you if you can get it. It's a great thing. So why this unreal and distorted view of marriage? If it's not based in reality, and it isn't, why are people so negative and afraid of it? Why are they putting it off? Why are they failing to do it in such huge numbers? Point two. There are a couple of underlying attitudes, and here's the main thing. Essentially, there's been a change in our culture to the understanding of the purpose of marriage. There's been a change with regard to what is understood as the purpose of marriage. The biblical idea, and by the way, to some degree, other traditional cultures align with this, but the biblical idea of marriage is that marriage is something that creates a framework for lifelong devotion of love between a man and a woman, or let me break that down. Basically, the purpose of marriage is it's a framework to do three things, at least. First of all, it's designed to help each party subordinate their individual impulses and interests in favor of the family, the relationship, and growth in character. See, one of the purposes of marriage is making it very, very difficult to get out. And therefore, what's more important than my happiness at the moment is the marriage, is the relationship. In other words, you subordinate individual interests and you subordinate your individual impulses for the good of the marriage, the relationship, and it creates character over time. That's one of the designs. Another design is that men and women are so deeply different, and yet they clash, and yet they mesh. Their differences make them clash. On the other hand, their differences make them mesh, and marriage is a way of bridging that gap and really creating an interlockedness and bringing male and female together with their different views of life and their different insights, their different gifts and their different weaknesses together into a whole. And then thirdly, designed to create a long-term, stable, secure setting for raising children. In other words, marriage is a public good. It's a marriage that's good for human character development. It's a marriage that's good for relationships between genders. It's a marriage is a good thing for raising children and so forth.
I highly recommend watching the rest of the Tim Keller speech. I'll link the video in the show notes, as well as the other video clips and stuff from this podcast. But the point that he's making is that over the course of about 5 decades, the value of marriage in society, unfortunately, has gone down. Or at least the perception of marriage has changed. And therefore, that is a reason for people having some type of fear of marriage. But I think the point is that marriage is an institution that, when done the right way, is actually a public good and a self-serving way of finding new purpose in life, essentially. But from a biblical standpoint, it must include God in the midst of it in order to get the full effect, quote unquote. Here's another illustration that is popular in Christian circles. Picture a triangle with the point at the top and the base at the bottom. God should be at the top of the triangle. The husband and wife are at the bottom ends. When the husband and wife move up the line of the triangle towards God, they, husband and wife, in turn, get closer together. That's just a simple visual description of a Christian marriage. God should be at the center, and when we live a godly life, we will, in theory, become much better spouses for one another. But Andrew, not everyone is a Christian. You can't force people to believe all that. I know. Which is why I'm not imposing anything on anyone, just simply describing what I believe to be true. And I'm describing this in good faith. I mean, people get married for various reasons, weird reasons, and to each his own. Some people get married for tax benefits. I've seen this firsthand. Some people get married because they already had kids together. Heck, some people are not legally married yet call their significant other husband or wife, which, I get it, but that just downplays the significance of marriage, in my opinion. And I think that's what bothers me the most, is that marriage, what was once regarded as a sacred and respected institution throughout history for the most part, has now become kind of watered down and insignificant in society. I mean, the order of romance at one point used to be you fall in love with someone, then you get married, then you have sex, then you have kids. But now, after the, whole sexual revolution thing taking place, the order has become first you have sex, then maybe you fall in love, then you accidentally have kids, accidentally in quotes, and then get married. This order just seems off to me. I can only imagine that type of marriage is built on sandy ground. And of course, with the government being involved in marriage, which, originally marriage used to be strictly a religious institution, marriage has turned into now simply a legal document to some people, just a contract. It's just a piece of paper, as some cynical types like to refer it as, which marriage should actually be viewed more like a covenant. Well, what's the difference between a contract and a covenant? Well, a contract is bound by law, and a covenant, like the covenant God had with the people of Israel, is a formal promise or agreement without any kind of exchange of value. I mean, it is legally binding to a certain extent, but it's simply a promise of good faith, a vow, if you will. It's an act of faith. And what is an act of faith? Well, it's an adventure for a husband and wife to embark on. And I say adventure because you truly have no idea what life is going to throw at you. But if you make that promise with that other person, if you make that covenant that, that you will go through it together, through thick and thin, you will both come out on the other side stronger than before. If you believe in the concept of marriage as a covenant, something very, very special. Should government get involved? Well, unfortunately, yes, but I wish it didn't. I mean, it has to, because we live in a land where everything has monetary value. So yes, if there is a nasty divorce before, a court, I guess there should be some kind of manner of dividing assets and whatnot. So it's kind of a necessary evil, I guess, because we have divorce and divorce is a thing. And of course, the stats show that 1 in 2 marriages end in divorce. So either you have to have your ducks lined up in a row or, sign a prenup, which once again furthers my view that societally, marriage is not respected or honored as much, which there's a case to be made that maybe it has to do with celebrity culture. Maybe celebrity culture plays a part in that negative view of marriage as well. I mean, we all heard we hear about the celebrity news of, oh, this Hollywood actor or actress is working on their 5th marriage and this person getting divorced again. And it's like, really? You make a ton of money, from reciting lines off of a piece of paper, and you can't even hold down a marriage? I mean, you have the best job possible. But, I think that also lessened this once high view of marriage. Just seeing Hollywood celebrities going through marriages like it's going out of style, I think has a negative, or plays a negative role in the view of marriage. But anyway, I want to end this topic of marriage with a story that a coworker told me about his in-laws that painted a beautiful picture in my mind about what a marriage should look like. So here we go. Story time. This married couple, they have been together for a very long time. I'm going to assume, since my coworker that I'm referring to he's around 40 years old, then so I'm going to assume that his in-laws are around maybe their late 60s. So, that's just my best guess. And I'm going to guess that they've been married, let's just say 30 years for the sake of the story. Lucas, if you're listening, sorry if I got the numbers wrong. But anyway, we're saying this is a 30-year marriage, okay? And we can assume that a 30-year marriage is a solid marriage. Probably have been through a lot. And they've raised 1 child. They are now empty nesters. It's safe to say that a 30-year marriage is on a different level than a 3-year marriage. So here's the story. This married couple, over the course of their lives, have acquired 1,000 orchids at their house. The orchid is a beautiful plant, which are typically seen in a small pot with a tall stem, usually propped up by a stick to hold it up, and typically has white petals with maybe some type of coloring, usually some purple. Google an orchid if you don't know what it looks like. It really is a pretty plant. And it generally symbolizes love and romance, luxury and sophistication, beauty and grace, fertility, strength, and endurance. So this married couple has 1,000 of them. 1,000. I'm going to say that they're inside the house and planted outside the house, perhaps. 1,000 orchids, if you can picture that. Which, if you had 1,000 orchids in and around your house, that's a lot of upkeep to keep them growing healthy and whatnot. So the man would take the time out of his day to tend to these orchids. Just like any plant in a garden, special care goes into keeping orchids growing strong. You have to keep them from direct sunlight. You have to trim the roots and trim the blooms that have died. You have to keep them in proper temperature, water them weekly, and feed them fertilizer at least once a month. So, as you can imagine, there's a lot of work that goes into the orchid plant, but now imagine tending to 1,000 of them. He would spend hours and hours out of the week to make sure their orchids were in good shape. Now, aside from the orchids, there's always the usual household chores that this married couple would share. Cleaning, mopping, dusting, you name it. So in this marriage, cleaning and upkeep for the orchids are a big part of keeping the house in order. The story goes that one time, the husband forgot to do one of the cleaning chores because, well, time had escaped him from all the orchid work that he had been doing throughout the week. So his wife yelled at him for not mopping the floors like he should have. Well, he did a wise thing. He did not fight his wife over the mopping chore. No, instead of giving her a piece of his mind, he kept it to himself. But he did eventually let it out, but not to his wife, but to his son-in-law, my coworker. So at this point, the man is mingling with his son-in-law and told him what happened to him. He told him the event that his wife just scolded him for not mopping the floor. He said he was busy tending the orchids. And then the real truth came out. The man said he never once liked the orchids in and around the house. He actually kind of hates tending to the orchids. He doesn't care for them. He never did. He wishes he didn't have to take the time to water them and prune them and fertilize them. If he didn't take care of the orchids, he would probably be saving himself 20 to 30 hours of work throughout the week. So my coworker asked his father-in-law, so if you hate the orchids so much, why do you even do it? Why waste your time? And the father-in-law responded, because I do it for her. Because it's something she loves. So when my coworker told me the story, I immediately thought, wow, that is like the best story to describe the concept of marriage. Marriage is ultimately putting the other person in the marriage first before yourself. That is the key. Marriage is making the needs of your spouse your own. Marriage is sacrifice. Sacrifice. Another term that modern day folks have no care for or concept of, in my opinion. Sacrifice is at the core of Christianity. Before Jesus was moments away from being captured to be crucified, Jesus prayed to his Father in heaven saying, Lord, if possible, let this cup pass from me. Meaning, God, if there's another way where I don't have to be crucified, please make another way. But there was no other way for God to show his love to his church. There had to be a sacrifice. In order to show love, something has to be given up. God loved the world, as in his creation, that he sent his son, Jesus, to die on the cross for our sins and to be resurrected, to show us that we too will be resurrected in Christ after our days on earth are over. But sacrifice shows love. Sacrifice is the evidence that you can give up something for someone else because you see them as so important that you can put off your own desires for someone else's. That is why compromise is so important in a marriage too. Compromise is when you and your spouse can come to an agreement on something. Maybe you both don't get exactly what you both want, but you both can come to some kind of understanding on a particular need or want to where both parties can be satisfied. If you can understand that going into a marriage means I'm going to give up some freedom that I once had to build a future with this person, to put God at the center of the marriage in order to know how to fully love and respect this person, and understand that placing the other's needs ahead of your own, if both parties can both agree that this formula, for lack of a better term, this formula is a key to a successful marriage. And also understand God's original plan for marriage, then yes, I think it's safe to say you are setting yourself up for a successful marriage. And successful doesn't mean perfect. It just means you're aware that the marriage is more like a living organism that grows and evolves. It falls ill, but it can be nurtured back to health. A poor marriage is one that remains stagnant. In Christianity, Jesus is the groom and the church is the bride. Jesus is faithful to us. So, Christians out there listening to this, we are to be faithful to our Lord because our faith in Him is a marriage. Anyway, I've spent way too much time on this topic. I mean, really, like, what, an hour? Jeez, this is the longest episode yet. So I'm going to bring this to an end here. Please, if you have any questions or comments to anything I've said on today's podcast, please write to me or leave me a comment. If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave a comment below. If you are an emailing type of person, send me a line at faithandpoliticsandrew@gmail.com. And or if you're on Instagram, please like the Faith and Politics Instagram page and feel free to connect with me there and send me a message. Thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode, which, yes, it was a little different than the previous episodes, but hey, I just have one last thing to say to all you married folks out there, as well as those of you possibly looking to be married someday. I just have to remind you to do one thing. Keep up the faith.